Chapter 1. The Birth of the Wolf. In the shadowed halls of Jotunheim, where the wind howled like the cries of forgotten gods, a child was born, not to man nor beast, but to Loki, the trickster, and Angrboda, the giantess of the ironwood. This child was unlike any other. His first breath came not as a cry, but as a growl that sent a shiver through the roots of Yggdrasil itself. The Norns, the weavers of fate, paused at their loom that night. They saw the thread of this newborn stretch, long and dark, across the tapestry of the cosmos, tangled with threads of blood and fire. They whispered to one another, "This is Fenrir, the wolf who will devour the sun and tear apart the king of the gods." From the moment his eyes opened, glowing like molten gold, Fenrir was a creature of untamed power. His fur was black as the void between the stars, and his teeth gleamed sharp enough to rend stone. Even as a pup, his paws could crush bones, and his voice was a thunderclap across the 9 realms. The gods in Asgard heard of his birth. Odin, Allfather, sat upon his high throne, Hlidskjalf, and gazed into the realms. He saw the wolf, small, but already brimming with a dark and unstoppable force. The prophecy of Ragnarok echoed in his mind, the day Fenrir would break free, his jaws gaping wide enough to swallow the sky. Yet Odin was not quick to strike, for the wolf was still young, and the Allfather was cunning. He ordered Fenrir to be brought to Asgard, not as a prisoner, but as a ward. "Let us raise him among us," Odin said, "that we may watch his growth and bind him with bonds stronger than steel when the time comes." And so Fenrir came to the golden halls of the gods. He walked beside the Aesir, towering over the tallest of them by the time he reached his 2nd year. None dared to approach him except Tyr, the god of war and justice. Tyr saw in the wolf not only the doom foretold, but a creature of honor in his own savage way. He fed Fenrir with his own hands, and the wolf trusted no one more. Still, whispers spread in the golden halls. Each day, Fenrir grew larger, stronger, more cunning. The ground trembled when he ran, and his howl could make the stars flicker. The gods began to fear that one day, no wall nor weapon in all the 9 realms would contain him. One night, beneath a blood-red moon, Odin stood on the Bifrost Bridge, gazing toward the dark horizon. He felt the weight of fate pressing down upon him. "If we do not act," he murmured, "the day will come when his fangs pierce the flesh of the Alf." And in the far reaches of the ironwood, Angrboda heard that whisper of fate in the wind and smiled. She knew her son was not just a beast, he was the storm that would break the world. The first seeds of betrayal had been sown. Chapter 2. The Golden Chains. The days in Asgard passed like the slow turning of the great world tree, yet Fenrir grew with unnatural speed. By the 3rd winter, he was larger than a warhorse. By the 5th, he could look Odin himself in the eye without lowering his head. The gods began to speak in hushed voices when the wolf padded through the halls of. His footsteps sounded like distant drums of war, and his golden eyes burned with an intelligence that made even the Allfather uneasy. One evening, Odin summoned the Aesir to the great council. The hall was heavy with the smell of mead and smoke, yet no one smiled. Thor gripped Mjolnir tightly, his knuckles white. Frigg's gaze was cold, her thoughts hidden. At the far end, Tyr sat silent, knowing what was to come. Odin rose. "Brothers, sisters, we have raised the wolf in our midst. We have fed him, sheltered him, and taught him the ways of the gods. But we cannot ignore the prophecy. Fenrir will one day kill me, and with my death, the 9 realms will burn. We must act before the day of doom arrives. A murmur rippled through the hall. Loki's face was unreadable. He was the father of Fenrir, yet bound by the oaths he had sworn to Asgard. Still, a flicker of defiance sparked in his eyes. Thor was the first to speak. "If the beast is dangerous, I will crush him beneath Mjolnir." But Odin shook his head. "Not yet. To kill him now would only bring the doom swifter. No, we must bind him." The gods forged the first chain, thick as a ship's mast, from the iron of the earth's bones. They called it lighting. With smiles and false cheer, they invited Fenrir to test his strength against it. The wolf, suspicious but proud, agreed. They wrapped the massive links around his body. Fenrir flexed once, twice, and the chain shattered into splinters of metal. The gods forced smiles, but unease gnawed at their hearts. Undeterred, they forged a second chain, stronger still, from the sinews of mountains and the roots of glaciers. This was Drami. Again they approached Fenrir, their laughter ringing hollow in the cold air. The wolf let them bind him, eyes gleaming with amusement. He strained against the chain, and though it held for a moment, the links groaned, then burst apart like dry twigs. Fenrir shook the fragments from his fur and laughed a deep, rolling growl that echoed off the golden walls. The gods knew then, no chain of mortal metal would hold him. Odin's gaze turned towards Svartalfheim, the realm of the dwarves, the greatest smiths in all the 9 realms. He sent Freyr's messenger to bargain for a binding unlike any other. The dwarves agreed, but at a terrible price. From the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the breath of a fish, the spit of a bird, and the sinews of a bear, they crafted a ribbon called Gleipnir. It was soft and smooth, like silk, yet stronger than the foundations of the world. When returned, the gods marveled at it. Thor frowned. This will hold the wolf." Odin only nodded. "It will, but we must be cunning." And so they prepared their final test. But Fenrir, now wise to the gods' games, was not so easily deceived. Chapter 3. The Growing Terror. Fenrir's strength surpasses all gods. The halls of Asgard had never known such silence. Even the clang of the blacksmiths, the music of the skalds, and the laughter of the feasts seemed muted under the shadow of one named Fenrir. From the day he had first been brought to Asgard, the gods had told themselves they could control the beast. They had watched him grow from a cub, his paws oversized, his golden eyes wide with a kind of innocence. But now, the innocence had gone. What remained was a wolf so large that when he stood, his muzzle could look over the highest hall. Thor himself, the god of thunder, stood one day before Fenrir to test the beast's might. He pressed his hands against the wolf's shoulders, straining every sinew, and yet Fenrir only tilted his head, as though puzzled by such feeble resistance. When Thor pushed harder, the wolf merely stepped forward, driving the thunder god back across the courtyard. "He grows too quickly," Frey warned Odin during the council. "Too quickly, and too strong," Heimdall added, his golden eyes sharp with worry. The gods had thought the chains of Goldrami would hold him. They had been forged in the heart of Nidavelir's furnaces, cooled in the rivers of Muspelheim, stronger than any weapon of Midgard. And yet Fenrir had shattered them like brittle ice. Each day, his hunger grew. He devoured whole oxen in a single meal, and when food was scarce, his golden eyes would drift toward the halls of men, as if imagining the taste of mortal flesh. The Allfather's ravens, Hugin and Munin, whispered of Fenrir's strength to every corner of the 9 realms. Soon, even mortals began to speak of the wolf of Asgard, the beast destined to devour the sun. But what unsettled the gods most was not merely his size or hunger, it was his mind. Fenrir was cunning. When the warriors sparred in the training grounds, he would watch, head tilted, studying their movements. When the blacksmiths hammered steel, his gaze lingered on the shaping of metal. There were nights when Odin would find the wolf staring at him through the long shadows, eyes unblinking. It was not the gaze of an animal. It was the gaze of something ancient, something that knew its place in the weave of fate. The seeress had spoken long ago. The wolf shall break the bonds of gods, the father of all shall fall to his jaws, and the world shall drown in fire and blood. Odin feared the prophecy, but he feared something more immediate. The moment when Fenrir's strength would eclipse that of all Asgard. That moment was close, too close. So, the gods gathered again in the great hall of. "We cannot wait for prophecy to guide us," said Freya, her voice sharp as steel. "If we do nothing, Fenrir will one day walk into this hall, and none of us will stand against him." "We have already tried chains," Thor rumbled. "What else is there?" It was Tyr, the god of war, who stepped forward. His voice was calm, though his eyes never left Odin's. "If strength cannot hold him," Tyr said, "then we must turn to cunning. The dwarves may forge something that no strength can break. But to bind him, one among us will have to earn his trust." The hall fell silent. Every god knew Fenrir trusted no one save Tyr. The war god had been the only one brave enough to feed the wolf by hand when he was still young. It was Tyr who met the golden eyes without flinching, Tyr who dared to stroke the thick fur between his ears. Odin's gaze hardened. "Then it is decided. We will send word to the dwarves will craft what no weapon can sever." And Tyr, Odin paused, for the weight of his next words was heavy. "You will lead him to his final binding." Far from the council, in the shadow of the mountains, Fenrir lay with his head upon his paws. The wind carried whispers from the halls above, but he did not need to hear the words. He could feel it in the air, the taste of fear. And Fenrir, the wolf who would devour the gods, began to smile. Chapter 4. The Challenge of Tyr. The black halls of Sportalfheim rang with the sound of hammer against anvil. Sparks lit the darkness like fireflies as the dwarves worked, short, broad-shouldered masters of metal whose skill could rival the magic of the Norns themselves. Odin's message had reached them. Forge a binding for Fenrir, the wolf destined to end the world. The dwarves did not take the task lightly. They knew what this beast was, what he would one day do. But the gods were not asking for a mere chain. They demanded something no strength could break. So, the dwarves crafted a ribbon. It was smooth as silk, soft to the touch, and impossibly thin. But woven into its threads were the strangest of ingredients. The sound of a cat's footstep, the roots of a mountain, the beard of a woman, the breath of a fish, the spittle of a bird, and the sinew of a bear's heart. This was Gleipnir thing beyond the world's logic, a binding that mocked the very idea of strength. When Odin saw it, he frowned. "This? A ribbon? You expect this to hold, Fenrir?" The head dwarf only smiled grimly. "If it does not, Allfather, nothing in the 9 realms ever will." In the halls of Asgard, Tyr prepared for what must come. Fenrir had grown restless. The great wolf prowled the courtyards at night, his claws scratching grooves into the stone. His hunger was endless, and his eyes glowed with an intelligence that unsettled even the bravest of the Tyr was the only one Fenrir allowed near. It was Tyr who fed him, Tyr who met his gaze without trembling. Over the years, the war god had spoken to the wolf not as a beast, but as an equal. And though Fenrir never said so aloud, he respected Tyr's courage. That trust would be the weapon Tyr must wield. The gods approached Fenrir in the wide meadow beneath the silver sky. They came with laughter and cheer, pretending their visit was nothing more than a game. Tyr walked at their head, carrying Gleipnir in both hands. Fenrir, Tyr called, "We have a challenge for you." The wolf's ears flicked forward. He rose, his shadow spilling over the grass like a tide. "Another chain," Fenrir growled. "You think I have not tired of your games? I've broken every one you've brought me." Tyr smiled faintly. "That is why this one will amuse you. Look." He held up the ribbon, and the sunlight caught on its silken threads. "This is not like the others. It is light as air. So thin, so fragile, that if you cannot break it, we will admit you are stronger than any god in Asgard." Fenrir narrowed his eyes. "A trick," he rumbled. "If I let you bind me, you will leave me trapped." The gods laughed, but there was unease beneath their voices. "If we cannot release you," said Tyr, "I will place my own hand in your jaws. If we deceive you, take it as payment." The wolf's golden eyes fixed on Tyr for a long moment. There was something in that gaze, respect, yes, but also something colder. Fenrir understood more than the gods believed. At last, the great wolf nodded. "Very well, Tyr, bind me. But remember your promise." As the ribbon was wound around his legs, Fenrir's muscles tensed. It felt like nothing soft as silk, light as feather. He could shatter this in an instant. He was certain of it. When the last loop was tied, Fenrir lunged. The earth shook beneath his strength. His claws tore deep into the soil. His jaws snapped at the air, but Gleipnir did not break. It held, impossibly unyielding, against every ounce of his power. The gods' laughter turned to silence. Fenrir's growl became a roar of fury. He twisted, thrashed, and bit, but the ribbon only dug deeper into his fur. "You have deceived me," Fenrir snarled, and before Tyr could speak, the wolf clamped his jaws shut on the war god's hand. Bones snapped, and blood spilled onto the grass. Tyr did not cry out. He simply stood, jaw set, as Fenrir tore the hand away. Odin stepped forward, his voice cold. "Let the wolf lie there until the end of days." The gods drove a sword between Fenrir's jaws to hold them open, and the beast's roar shook the sky. Bound and betrayed, Fenrir swore vengeance. At Ragnarok, the wolf growled, "I will kill you all. I will find you, All-Father, and your blood will be the last I taste." And the gods, though they had won, walked away with the heavy knowledge that their victory had come at a terrible cost. Chapter 5. The Silent Years. The meadow where Fenrir lay bound became a place the gods rarely visited. Once, his restless pacing and booming growls had filled the air of Asgard. Now, only the wind whispered over the grass. The ribbon Gleipnir held tight around his massive form, digging into his fur like thin lines of fire. The sword, jammed between his jaws, kept his teeth apart, forcing every breath into a low, rumbling growl. But the silence was deceptive. Beneath it, hatred grew like a storm in the deep sea. The first seasons after Fenrir's binding were uneasy. The Einherjar, the warriors of Valhalla, avoided the meadow, for the wolf's golden eyes followed them with a gaze that pierced armor and courage alike. Children of Asgard dared one another to get close, only to run screaming when Fenrir's claws raked the soil. Only tears still came. With one hand, he brought water in a silver bowl and meat cut into chunks, placing them near the wolf's muzzle. Fenrir would not speak to him, but neither would he snap at him as he did the others. Tyr had paid his price, and in that shared wound, a strange bond remained. One day, Tyr said quietly, setting down a haunch of meat, "The Norns' prophecy will come true. But until then, you must wait." Fenrir's only reply was the slow closing of his eyes, but Tyr felt the unspoken promise, "And when that day comes, I will not forget you were here." Years turned into centuries. The golden walls of Asgard gleamed through countless dawns and dusks, and the meadow grew wild around the wolf's body. Moss crept over the rocks, wildflowers sprouted between his claws, and birds dared to perch upon his fern, till one twitch of his ears sent them fleeing in terror. The gods forgot, in their pride, that the ribbon Gleipnir was not eternal. It did not fray, but it was still a thing born of the world's magic, and all magic has its end. Meanwhile, in the shadowed halls of Jotunheim, Loki watched and waited. His son lay chained, humiliated, and Loki's rage burned hotter than the flames of Patience, Fenrir, Loki whispered to the wind, knowing the wolf could not hear him. The day will come, the skies will break, the seas will boil, and you will be free. Then the All-Father will taste fear. The giants stirred restlessly at these words. Skoll and Hati, Fenrir's own offspring, ran tirelessly across the heavens, chasing the sun and moon. The Norns' prophecy said that when they caught their prey, darkness would swallow the world, and Fenrir's chains would shatter. In Asgard, Odin often walked to the highest tower at night, looking down toward the meadow where the wolf lay. He told himself it was vigilance, not fear, that kept him watching. Yet deep within him, the All-Father knew the truth. This silence was not safety. It was a pause before a roar. The stars themselves seemed to sense it. Some nights, their light dimmed, as though the sky had drawn in a breath it was afraid to release. Then, one night, the earth trembled. It was not much, just a faint shiver that rippled through the meadows and shook the leaves from the trees. But Gleipnir felt it. The ribbon's threads tightened, strained, and for the first time in hundreds of years, a faint creak whispered in the still air. Fenrir opened his eyes. The silent years were ending. Chapter 6, Whispers of Doom. The crack in the earth had been small, barely wide enough to swallow a blade of grass. Yet for the gods, it was as if a drum had sounded in the distance, one they could not unhear. In the halls of Asgard, Odin gathered the Aes. The firelight cast long shadows on the golden walls as the All-Father spoke. The Norns' threads tighten, he said, his voice grave. The end we have long feared stirs in the darkness. Keep watch for signs, strange weather, restless seas, the moon's pale light dimming. Thor slammed his fist on the table. If Fenrir's bonds are weakening, then we should end him now. Let us tear the wolf apart before he can rise. But Odin shook his head. The prophecy is bound to him. If we slay him before the appointed time, the weave of fate will only find another way. We must endure until the destined hour. Frigg's eyes, full of worry, flicked toward the meadow. She had dreamed of the wolf's golden eyes glowing brighter than fire, and of Tyr standing in blood up to his knees. She said nothing, but her hands clenched tightly in her lap. In the mortal world of Midgard, strange omens began to spread. Farmers woke to find their fields frozen in midsummer. Fishermen spoke of seas that boiled, killing fish in their nets. Wolves howled through the night, though none were seen in daylight. The Volva, a wandering seeress, came to the gates of Asgard one stormy morning. Rain dripped from her tattered cloak as she knelt before Odin. The beast dreams of red skies and broken chains, she rasped. When the sun falters, and his sons devour its light, his hunger will know no bounds. The Aesir shifted uncomfortably. Only Loki smirked from his place at the edge of the hall, his eyes glittering like a man who knew far more than he should. Far away, in the desolate meadow, Fenrir lay still. But within his chest, the beat of his heart had grown louder, stronger. His golden eyes watched the horizon, where black clouds gathered in unnatural shapes. A crow landed on a nearby branch, a bird, unlike the others, its feathers darker than midnight, its voice low and steady. Soon, it croaked. Soon, the sky will open, and the world will burn. Fenrir growled deep in his throat, the sound vibrating through the earth. He could feel the ribbon's magic twitch against his fur, like prey about to bolt. He did not yet know when, but he could taste the fear in the air. In Jotunheim, the giants celebrated. They sharpened their weapons and whispered of the coming war. Skoll and Hati ran faster than ever across the heavens, snapping their jaws at the sun and moon. The air crackled with their chase, and each day the light seemed a little weaker. Loki stood among them, looking toward Asgard with a smile that could cut glass. "They think they have time," he said softly. "They think fate can be delayed, but the wolf is patient-tanned. Patience is the sharpest fang of all." By the end of that season, the gods could no longer deny it. The omens were everywhere. The Bifrost flickered with strange colors. The sea serpent Gormengander stirred in the deep, sending waves that battered Midgard's coasts. And in the meadow, Fenrir had begun to test his chains, not yet breaking them, but pulling just enough to hear the faint, sweet sound of strain. The whispers of doom had begun their song. Chapter 7: The Hunt for the Sun. In the endless skies above Midgard, two shadows moved like streaks of Nightskoll and Hati, the sons of Fenrir. Born of hunger and instinct, they lived only for the chase. One pursued the blazing sun, the other the pale moon. For centuries, the celestial dance had been the same. The sun and moon would flee, swift as wind, and the wolves would give chase, but never close the gap. Yet something had changed. The air felt heavier. The light dimmed faster each evening. The sun's warmth was weaker, as though it feared to shine too brightly. From his meadow prison, Fenrir lifted his head and howled. It was no ordinary howl, it was a call, a command, a father's voice echoing across realms. The sound shook the skies, sending ripples of power through the air. Skoll and Hati heard, and their speed doubled. In Asgard, Heimdall leaned over the rainbow bridge, his golden eyes narrowing. "They are closer," he murmured to himself. The sound of the howl reached Odin in his high seat. He turned his gaze across the 9 realms and saw it clearly, the wolf's jaws snapping at the heels of the fleeing light. Frigg entered the hall quietly. "You feel it too," she said. "Yes," Odin replied, his voice heavy. "When they catch the sun and moon, the sky will darken, and the first horn will sound." Thor, restless and impatient, gripped Mjolnir. "Then let us stop them before they strike. I will ride into the heavens and break their necks." But Odin raised a hand. "You cannot kill what fate has decreed to live until the end. Every blow you strike will only hasten the moment we dread." In Midgard, mortals began to notice strange patterns. Days grew shorter even when they should have lengthened. Nights came earlier, cloaked in an eerie red glow. Children cried in their sleep, dreaming of wolves with eyes like burning gold. Farmers lit bonfires in the fields to strengthen the sun, but the light only grew weaker. The Valva returned to Asgard, her voice trembling with urgency. "The children of the wolf will soon taste their prey, and when they do, the father will rise." Odin dismissed her, but her words clung to the air like smoke. In the far reaches of the sky, Skoll leaped, his shadow passing over Midgard like an eclipse. The sun's light flickered, dimmed, then blazed again as it broke free. Behind him, Hati snapped at the moon, his teeth grazing the silvery glow. The moon shivered and swayed in its path, as if wounded. Fenrir's golden eyes closed in satisfaction. The bonds still held him, but the rhythm of fate was accelerating. His sons were near their victory, and when they struck, the world would fall into chaos. Loki appeared beside him, unseen by the gods. "They run well," Loki said, with a sly grin. "They were born to run," Fenrir growled. "And soon, they will run no more." High in the sky, the chase reached its most dangerous point. Skoll's jaws snapped so close to the sun that flames licked his muzzle. The sun screamed in a voice mortals could not hear, a sound that rattled the mountains. The moon fled faster, but Hati's long strides ate the distance. When the day finally ended, the sun dipped below the horizon in terror, and the moon barely escaped into the night. The gods breathed a momentary sigh of relief, but they knew the next hunt would be closer still. And somewhere, in the quiet between worlds, the first threads of Ragnarok were being woven tighter. Chapter 8: The Breaking of Chains. For countless years, Fenrir had strained against the invisible bonds of Gleipnir, the silk-like ribbon woven from the sound of a cat's footstep, the beard of a woman, the breath of a fish, the roots of a mountain, the spittle of a bird, and the sinews of a bear had held firm against every surge of his strength. But time had changed the wolf. Every howl to his sons, every tremor of fear from Asgard, every scream of the sun and moon as Skoll and Hati drew closer fed him. Power seeped into his muscles, his bones, his blood. The ground beneath him quaked when he shifted. The lake surrounding his prison, churned like a storm, was trapped within it. Odin stood at the edge of Hlidskjalf, watching from afar. Fenrir's golden eyes burned brighter now, no longer dulled by long captivity. "The ribbon will not hold forever," Odin muttered. Tyr, the only god who had dared to face Fenrir before, clenched his single fist. "Then we must reinforce it. Call the forge new chains." But Odin shook his head slowly. Gleipnir was not forged by mortal or godly means. If it breaks, there will be nothing to replace it. Thor slammed Mjolnir onto the marble floor. "Then, when it breaks, we kill him." The room fell silent. Even Thor's bravado felt hollow in the shadow of Fenrir's wrath. Deep in the desolate land, where Fenrir was bound, the wolf shifted again. His muscles rippled under his black fur. The ribbon creaked not in the way rope strains, but in the way something ancient begins to forget its own purpose. A small tear appeared no larger than a strand of hair, but it was enough. Fenrir felt it, and he smiled. His head turned toward the void where Loki sometimes appeared. "It begins," Fenrir growled. Loki emerged from the shadows, his eyes glinting. "Then be patient, my son. Your brothers run faster each day. When they strike, your hour will come." Fenrir lowered his massive head, and his breath steamed in the cold air. "No, father. My hour comes now." The ground trembled. Mountains nearby groaned and cracked. The lake around his prison boiled as Fenrir pulled not wildly, but with precise, controlled force. The tear in Gleipnir widened. The ribbon shimmered, its magic screaming in protest. From the Bifrost, Heimdall saw the movement. "Odin, the wolf moves." The gods rushed to the edge of the bridge, peering into the mortal realm. Their eyes widened as they saw the impossible Gleipnir, the unbreakable, fraying like old cloth. Odin's voice was grim. "This is only the first crack. When the last thread snaps, the end will follow." Fenrir's laughter rolled across the 9 realms, shaking the very sky. The chains had not broken fully, but they no longer held as tightly as before. He could move more freely, testing his legs, shifting his weight. The gods knew then. Ragnarok was not a prophecy far in the future. It had already begun. Chapter 9. The sky turns red. The first omen came at dawn. Across the 9 realms, mortals awoke to see the sun hanging lower, its golden light dimmed, tinged with the hue of blood. Farmers dropped their tools. Sailors halted their voyages. Warriors stopped mid-training, staring skyward in dread. In the wilds, Fenrir's firstborn ran harder than he had ever run. His paws struck the clouds like drums of war, his jaws snapping at the fleeing sun goddess. The air blazed with heat where his breath touched it, scorching the winds. Behind him, Hati pursued the moon through the twilight path. The silver glow that had once comforted travelers was now a pale, quivering light as the moon god looked over his shoulder to see the great wolf closing in. From Asgard's highest watchtower, Heimdall gripped the hilt of his sword. The chase has quickened. They are nearly upon them. Odin stepped forward, his single eye fixed on the sky. The sun was no longer purely gold, it was bleeding, its edge darkened by Skill's shadow. The moon, trailing closer than ever before, shimmered faintly as if its light was being torn away, piece by piece. Thor scowled. "Let them come. I will smash their skulls before they touch the sun or moon." But Odin's voice cut through the air like steel. "You cannot strike what runs faster than thought, Thor. And when they catch their prey, Mjolnir will not bring back the light." In Midgard, fear grew like wildfire. Priests of every temple offered sacrifices. Old seers whispered that the world's heartbeat was slowing, that the Fimbulwinter, the endless winter, was drawing near. And, deep within his prison, Fenrir raised his head to the reddening sky. The reflection of his son's hunt glowed in his eyes. "Run, my children," he growled. "Run until the heavens break." The tear in Gleipnir pulsed with energy, as though the wolf's growing freedom was tied to the dying light above. Far across the cosmic sea, cried out to brother, "They are closer." "I know," answered, his voice trembling. "But we must keep running until—" He did not finish. For in that moment, Hati's jaws snapped shut upon the moon's trailing light. Esklo shuddered, his speed faltered, and Skull, seeing the weakness, lunged forward with a roar that shook the stars. The sky deepened into crimson. In Asgard, alarms rang. Heimdall lifted the Jallarhorn to his lips, but did not yet blow it. Was not Ragnarok, not yet. But the air was heavy with the knowledge that it was close, too close. Odin turned to Frigg. The prophecy tightens. Soon the end will no longer be a vision, it will be upon us. By nightfall, the stars themselves seemed dimmer. Mortals whispered by firelight, wondering how many more dawns would come before the world ended. In the silence between their fears, a sound rose, distant, rolling thunder. But it was no storm. It was the pounding of 2 sets of paws, echoing across the realms. The hunt was almost over. Chapter 10. The Hunt's End. The final chase began under a sky the color of molten iron. Skill's breath burned the clouds, his muscles coiled and released like storms. Behind him, The wind split into ribbons under the sheer speed of his run. Ahead, S light flickered like a candle in a hurricane. Hati, further to the east, had almost overtaken. His paws struck the invisible path between the constellations, each step echoing in the bones of gods and mortals alike. The realms watched. In Midgard, villagers clung to each other as day and night blurred. In Jotunheim, frost giants raised their heads from the ice fields, sensing the coming dark. In Alfheim, the elves' bright towers dimmed, their crystal spires losing their glow. S' voice was strained, her once golden hair now streaked with shadow. I can run no farther. Skill's eyes flared like twin suns of rage. Then the sky is mine. With a final, earth-shattering leap, the wolf soared through the last stretch of light. His jaws closed around S' chariot, snapping the harness of fire. The sun screamed a sound that was part light, part sorrow, and shattered into 1,000 burning fragments. The flames fell through the 9 realms like dying meteors, extinguishing as they touched the earth. At the same instant, Hati lunged. His teeth found S' silver chariot, crushing it with a single bite. The moon's glow spilled like liquid silver, dissolving into the black void. Stars flickered desperately, as if trying to fill the darkness, but their light was too faint. The sky went blind. In Asgard, Heimdall's eyes widened. The moment the sun and moon were gone, the air thickened with the taste of iron and ash. He lifted the Jallarhorn and blew. The sound was not a call, it was a wound in the air. Its echo rippled through the roots of Yggdrasil, shaking the world tree. In Niflheim, corpses stirred. In Muspelheim, flames roared higher. The seas around Midgard churned violently, as if Jarmungandr was shifting in his sleep. Fenrir heard the horn from his prison. A slow smile spread across his muzzle. The bonds of Gleipnir screamed, threads snapping one by one. His shoulders bulged, his claws dug deep into the earth beneath him. Soon, he whispered. Very soon. But in the moment of the sun and moon's death, something else awoke in ancient darkness that had been waiting for this exact instant. Shadows uncoiled in the corners of every realm, taking shape as armies. Giants, undead warriors, and beasts forgotten by history stepped forward, each marching toward the final battlefield. And in that pitch-black sky, only one light remained, a blood-red star pulsing like the heart of a dying god. It was the first sign of the last war. Ragnarok had begun. Chapter 11. The Breaking of Chains. The death of the sun and moon was more than the end of light, it was the death knell of the old order. From the deep silence after the Jallarhorn's call, a sound like tearing worlds erupted. It was the sound of Gleipnir breaking. For centuries, the magical fetter had bound Fenrir in the lonely plain of Lyngvi, forged from impossible things. The sound of a cat's footstep, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the breath of a fish, the spittle of a bird. It had held, until now. Fenrir's muscles swelled like mountains shifting under the earth. Veins of shadow and fire traced along his massive frame, his eyes golden and blood-red, fixed on the horizon as the last fibers of Gleipnir frayed. With one final roar, he pulled Snap. The bonds didn't just break, they disintegrated into ash, blown away by the force of his exhale. The ground beneath Lyngvi split apart. Rivers boiled. Rocks shattered into dust. Fenrir stepped forward, each paw leaving a crater, his claws slicing through the air like black lightning. He turned his head toward the sky, where the blood-red star still pulsed. The wolves have fed. The sky is empty. Now it is my turn. From the shadows at the edge of the plain, shapes began to emerge, warriors in broken armor, frost giants wielding weapons carved from glaciers, serpents with eyes like molten gold. They had been waiting for this moment, summoned by the silent promise of Ragnarok. Among them walked Loki. His face bore a smile that was neither joy nor mockery, it was inevitability. "You took your time, my son," Loki said. Fenrir lowered his head until his teeth gleamed in the dim light. "I was patient. Now, father, lead me to the one I am promised." Loki's eyes narrowed. Odin, far away in Asgard, the All-Father, stood at the walls of Valhalla, watching the dark armies form beyond the His ravens, Hugin and Munin, had returned with grim whispers. "The wolf walks free." Odin's jaw tightened. The spear Gungnir felt heavier than ever in his hand. He knew the prophecy. He had always known it. Fenrir began to march. Every step brought him closer to the heart of the 9 realms. His growl carried on the wind, shaking the branches of Ygd, and with each breath, the world darkened further. Chapter 12: The First Clash. The air before battle was thick, not just with the smell of ash and burning earth, but with the weight of prophecy pressing down. From the gates of Asgard, the Einherjar warriors, chosen from the honored dead, stood ready in gleaming ranks. Shields locked, spears lowered, eyes fixed on the horizon. Over them towered Odin, helm crowned with raven's wings, the spear Gungnir glinting with divine fire. To his right, Thor gripped Mjolnir, its head crackling with storms that gathered unnaturally fast. Across the plains stretched the enemy. Fenrir stood at the forefront, a living mountain of fur, fangs, and muscle. His golden-red eyes burned with a hunger that no mortal could comprehend. At his flanks moved frost giants, their breath turning the air into shards of ice. Behind them slithered the coils of Jormungandr, the world's serpent, his massive body coiling in and out of the dark clouds above. Loki walked between the armies, staff in hand, smiling like a man watching the last act of a tragedy he had written long ago. The ground trembled as Fenrir's voice carried over the battlefield. "Odin, Alftar, come to me, so I may end the age you have ruled too long." Odin raised his spear. "Then step forward, beast, and meet the fate the Norns have woven for you." The first sound was not steel on steel, was thunder. Thor hurled Mjolnir into the enemy lines, the impact exploding in a shockwave that threw frost giants into the sky like ragdolls. Lightning licked across the field, setting fire to banners and splitting the earth. The Einherjar charged, their war cries shaking the heavens. Fenrir answered with a roar so powerful the air rippled, and the front ranks of Asgard's warriors were thrown back as though by a giant's hand. He lunged forward, his jaws snapping around an entire line of spearmen, lifting them into the air before crushing them into the soil. Odin moved like a storm given flesh, striking down enemies without pause, his spear finding throats and hearts with unerring precision. But his eyes never left Fenrir. The wolf's sheer size dwarfed every creature on the field. As the melee swirled, the ground shook again, this time from Jormungandr's coils slamming into the earth, cutting off Asgard's reinforcements. The stench of poison filled the air, corroding armor and blackening the skin of those who breathed it. Thor carved a path through the chaos, swinging Mjolnir in great arcs of lightning, until he stood nearly face to face with Fenrir. "Your hunger ends here, beast," Thor bellowed. Fenrir's lips curled back in a snarl, revealing fangs longer than the god's arm. "You are not the one I came for, Thunderer. but I will gladly tear you apart." They clashed, thunder meeting fang, lightning meeting shadow. The impact was so great that Yggdrasil itself shuddered, and far-off realms felt the echo. But as the fight raged, Odin knew this was only the opening act. Ragnarok had begun in truth, and the prophecy promised that neither side would leave this field untouched by death. And somewhere in the chaos, the Norns wove faster, their threads glowing red.